It's a great honor for me personally to be speaking with Marilynne Robinson tonight. I've long admired her writing. I'm not going to give any kind of formal introduction. She doesn't need it, and you're here to hear her, not me. Just by way of a sort of framing our discussion, I thought I might read two short paragraphs, neither from Gilead, in fact, so that's a suitable a completion is achieved, I think. One is from Marilynne's extraordinary book of essays, The Death of Adam, which seems to me, relatively speaking, a remarkably neglected work of nonfiction prose. And I do recommend these extraordinary essays. The essay that I'm reading the paragraph from is called Facing Reality. It's a little bit fiercer than Gilead, as these essays can be. What if, in important numbers, we believe there is a God who is mysterious and demanding, with whom one is not easily at peace? What if we believe there will be a reckoning? I find no evidence that such beliefs were felt to be discredited, or that they were consciously abandoned. They simply dropped out of the cultural conversation. And at the same time, we adopted this very small view of ourselves and others as consumers and patients and members of interest groups, creatures too minor, we may somehow hope, for great death to pause over us. If we do still believe in the seriousness of being human, while we have lost the means of acknowledging this belief, even in our thoughts, then profound anxiety, whose origins we would be at a loss to name, seems to me an inevitable consequence. And this may account for both the narrowness and the intensity of the fiction that contains us. It is our comfort and our distraction. We are spiritual agoraphobes. And then this is the opening of chapter 10 of Housekeeping. Cain murdered Abel, and blood cried out from the earth. The house fell on Job's children, and a voice was induced or provoked into speaking from a whirlwind. And Rachel mourned for her children, and King David for Absalom. The force behind the movement of time is a mourning that will not be comforted. That is why the first event is known to have been an expulsion, and the last is hoped to be a reconciliation and return. So memory pulls us forward. So prophecy is only brilliant memory. There will be a garden where all of us, as one child, will sleep in our mother Eve, hooped in her ribs and staved by her spine. Marilynne, I just wanted to... yeah, how do you affect that particular gear change? I mean, I'd happily just keep reading. It's pretty sublime. We have to do some prosaic work before we can ascend to that level again. And what I thought I might do, if this is acceptable to you, is start by asking you a little bit about the circumstances and composition of your first novel, Housekeeping, and then to move out from there to Gilead, and in particular to look at something which, of course, is of interest to both of us and I believe to many in this room, which is the themes, particularly the religious and metaphysical ones, that unite these two novels, and indeed the book of essays. I think you've said in the past that Housekeeping was obviously long in the writing, but that also you'd been storing away passages, shortish passages of prose, which you then came to build into a larger structure. And I just wanted to ask you about how that whole experience.
Actually, I was doing a dissertation, and I was afraid that if I did that sort of writing, I wouldn't continue doing, bell-let writing, shall we say. I was very interested in how metaphor works. I continue to be very interested in that. I think that metaphor is the sort of coinage of the mind that allows experience to be negotiated. There's a mysticism in that. The only analogy that I can think of is the way that mathematicians somehow can use numbers to describe physical reality. Why should this be true? Nevertheless, it's true. We can use language to evoke and to make meaningful things that are, perceptions, landscape, experience, and the transaction or the bond between the mind, the language, and the thing itself is very fascinating to me. And the experience of feeling as if in some sense I've captured what I meant to capture with my language is very satisfying and interesting, always surprising in a way. In any case, I did write these paragraphs to experiment with metaphor as much as anything. And then when I was done with the dissertation, I looked at these paragraphs and I thought, these are all about one thing. So that became the germ of housekeeping. I think it was perhaps 20 handwritten pages at the most. Then I went to France. I was teaching in a university there. I had a lot of spare time. And I continued writing. And I took this curious delight in the fact that I was probably the only person in the universe in France writing about Idaho. But that particular landscape has been important to my family. I was the fourth generation of my family to live there, which is unusual in that part of the country. And they stayed there because they were fascinated by how beautiful it is. And so no treatment of that landscape for me could be anything other than a sort of meditation on this strange and quite difficult beauty of that landscape. Mm-hmm. I actually wrote the book quite quickly. I think it was 18 months or 2 years.
Yeah. And the interest you have in metaphor, which is so obvious in your work, and one of the great joys, I think, was fed by by what writers in particular? It's so wonderful to read your prose because it reminds me of a phrase that Virginia Woolf uses about how she uses language with roots, and one always feels in your writing that that's exactly what's going on. That the words have deep historical roots. I mean, not just because you use a lot of allusion, biblical and poetic, but precisely because of this metaphorical impulse, this desire to sort of see the world almost as a sort of system of signs seems deeply 18th and 19th century in an American tradition. So I've just been sort of interested to know from those centuries the writers who made a great impact on you.
Well, they certainly were the 19th century Americans. Mm-hmm. Melville perhaps more than anyone else, but yeah, Thoreau, Emerson, Dickinson, and Whitman, they're my idols. And Faulkner of more modern mm-hmm. writers, and Wallace Stevens. When I was a sophomore in college, I was required to read a treatise by Jonathan Edwards called The Doctrine of Original Sin Defended. And this was wonderful for me because he has a footnote that describes how light affects the visual aspect of the moon. A very beautiful long footnote, which really kind of changed my consciousness. So I think you're quite right in saying that that's where my mind comes from, you know. Yeah.
Well, it's, as I say, it's one of the great pleasures in reading you. Thinking just this morning about the way these books are united. there's a way in which, of the two novels, you might say that the central characters are both, they both have only half of themselves in life. There's a phrase you use in housekeeping, incipient transfiguration. Sylvie goes through life in her